The Freudian model divides the human psyche in a variety of different ways, the simplest of which is conscious and unconscious. And Ellen Berger points out that by 1900, 4 functions of the unconscious had been described. There's the conservative, so that's memory. That's memory, so in some manner that we don't really understand, your psyche is the storehouse of representations of experiences that you've had prior to today. Now, some of those are recallable as the stories that constitute your experience. Those would be the sorts of things that come up in your mind as images, maybe dreamlike images or movie-like images, or stories that you can explicitly tell people about your past experiences where you're the actor in those experiences. There's also the elements of memory that enable you to do things, like to speak. And you don't have conscious access to how it is that you know how to speak, or, for example, how it is that you know how to ride a bike. That's more implicit forms of memory. So the unconscious contains the information or the skills or the circuitry that enables you to engage in complex motor acts that you've learned to do. Dissolutive. The unconscious contains habits. Those are the more procedural elements that I just described. And dissociated elements of the personality, which may lead a parasitic existence. Now that's an interesting idea. So part of that's predicated on the notion that, I've showed you this hierarchy before. Yes, you've seen this before, right? So now you can imagine that when you're watching, when you're interacting with maybe your father, your mother, your sister, your great aunt, or that there are chunks of their personality that you incorporate into yourself sort of from whole cloth, and maybe you're doing that in the Piagetian sense by imitating them. And so that your being is full of these hierarchies or sub-hierarchies, each of which is devoted towards a single purpose, or maybe a singular collection of purposes. And that you can switch back and forth between being dominated by one of these or the other. And some of them are more straightforward, like the state of perception and action that might characterize you if you're simply angry or if you're simply possessed by sexual desire. But the more complicated ones would be those that make those who know you say, you're acting just like your mother now, or you're acting just like your father now. And what that means in a sense from the Freudian perspective, and I think as well from the Piagetian perspective, that you've incorporated huge subsets of the habits and perceptual schemas that make up the people who were closest to you in your developmental history. Now, Freud would believe that those things can motivate you unconsciously in that, for example, you might be living out your parents' unconscious dreams, or maybe you're living out your parents' unconscious dreams that you be a bad child. That happens very frequently. I've seen families, for example, where a daughter was born instead of a son to the great dissatisfaction of the mother, and the consequence of that was that that child was essentially demonized from day one. And to the degree to which that was precisely unconscious behavior on the part of the mother was debatable, but certainly if you asked her if she was out to destroy her child with every action she ever took, she would say no. But if you watched her carefully across months, you would see that that was precisely what she was doing. Now you might ask, well, why would someone develop an attitude like that? And this particular person, the mother, had grown up in a culture where boys were more valued than girls, certainly within the confines of a given family, and she'd already had a daughter. So, was that her? Was it the culture? Was it something that she picked up from her own parents? God only knows, but it was this free-floating spirit, in a sense, that happened to inhabit her and shape the way that she was interacting with the world without her really understanding what she was doing at an articulated level at all. In fact, if you ever more or less confronted her with the evidence that she was doing such a thing, she did absolutely everything you could possibly imagine to refuse to take any ownership for that whatsoever, or to articulate it, or even to conceive that a human being might be capable of such a thing, even though the situation in her family made appalling look like a vacation. Creative. The unconscious serves as the matrix of new ideas. Well, here's an idea. where do your thoughts come from? Well, you say you think them up. Well, as far as black box explanations go, that's a prime one. What do you mean you think them up? Jung pointed out that that's not even accurate. It's more like they appear in your experience, more or less unbidden. It's a funny thing, because you can concentrate, and that seems to facilitate the process of the generation of new ideas, at least sometimes, but most of the time, it just seems like you're standing in a room by yourself in the dark, and a thought comes. And where does it come from? Well, the psychoanalytic explanation for that, which is more of a description, is, well, it comes from the unconscious. That is the unconscious that's producing those. Mythopoetic. The unconscious constructs narratives and fantasies that appear mythic or religious in nature. So, what that means, at least in part, is that some of the dissociated fragments of personality, say, that inhabit you and guide your actions, are so ancient, partly because of their biological basis and because of the ancient historical overlay on top of that, that they take the form of great myths and stories that look like they're common to everyone in one form or another. So a good example of that might be the degree to which you are possessed by rivalry with your sibling, which is one of the oldest stories that the individual members of mankind tell to one another, because it's such a common experience, and because the manner in which that experience is going to manifest itself has been shaped by cultural representations.